Greetings! I hope this video finds you well. I hope that everyone is staying safe, staying healthy. When you go out from your home, that you're practicing social distancing so that we can each do our part. Our text for today comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, verses 1 through 8 and 24 through 37. I want you to know I did not pick this. This is kind of weird that this came up in the lectionary for the narrative lectionary Lent, fifth Sunday of Lent. So yeah, this is it. Like I said, very weird, very timely. Here it goes. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginnings of birth pangs. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As long as its branches become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about the day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on watch. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake." The Gospel of our Lord. Yeah, like I said, it's an interesting text for this week. It's a hard one to kind of think of how to address in light of everything that's happening around our world right now. And I just want to start, because it's something that kind of came to mind when I was thinking about this, is when I was in grade school, I remember doing duck and cover drills. Does anybody else remember doing duck and cover drills? Basically, a special alarm would go off that sounded different than the fire alarm, and we had to quickly jump underneath our desks and crouch down into a little fetal position, and until the teacher told us to get up. I remember these specifically because almost every single time we did it, I bashed my head against my desk, either on the wood on top or on the metal on the bottom. It was without fail. And then I also remember that while we were huddled under the desk, I would just be sitting there chit-chatting with my buddy Andy, who was in the next seat over. Now, I didn't really understand at first why we were doing this. I didn't really get why this was important. And then when I found out, it was kind of terrifying. And then when I found out that basically doing this meant nothing, that it was pointless, because at the time it was in the midst of the Cold War, and there's always that threat between Russia, the USSR, and America that we were going to have a nuclear attack. And so supposedly jumping under your desk and hiding was going to save you from a nuclear attack. It doesn't matter whether you're sitting at your desk or you're under it. A nuclear bomb goes off near you, you're gone. Sorry, it's a false sense of security. But apparently at the time it made parents happy that they were doing something to prepare kids just in case this happened. And the reason I bring this up is because what we're living through right now and then are very, very different, very extremely different circumstances, extremely different events. But both of them have an air of hysteria that are surrounding them. A lot of extreme voices, a lot of false information, a lot of fear just in the air. Now, I want to bring us back a little bit and think of when this text was written. Mark was written right after the destruction of the first temple. I mentioned this before. So the people reading Mark in that first generation after it was written, and even a little bit after that, would be reading this in light of just witnessing one of the worst events in the history of Judah, the history of that area that we call Israel now. And basically what had happened was that there was a revolt amongst the Jewish people against the Roman rulers, and the Romans came down hard. Over 1/3 of the population was killed. The temple that was the center of worship for Jewish people, and a place that many Christians at the time looked at as the center of their spiritual life, was destroyed, gone. So there was just this real sense that the end of the world was upon them, that their way of life, their identity was gone, whether you're Jewish, Christian, whatever. This was a turning point in their history. And when you lose that many people, and you're going to lose a lot of family members, you're going to feel like this is the end. There's nothing left. And here we have these words from Jesus. These words that they're being reminded of that Jesus talked to them about. And so here we are. Then, here we are now, having Jesus tell us that things are going to happen. Terrible, terrible things are going to happen all around us. And people are going to claim that it's the end. People are going to lead you down false rabbit holes because of the hysteria that surrounds global events or just major local events. It's so easy for fear, hatred, anger to just take hold of us and help us become more susceptible to going into these paranoid lines of thought, these angry lines of thought, finding somebody to blame, finding somebody to fear, something to just grab onto as almost a survival mechanism in a way, so that we can try to make sense out of it. But what we also see in this text is Jesus is basically telling us No, it's not the end. You don't have to let paranoia, anger, and fear govern your actions. It's always healthy to have a small level of fear within us to make us respect what we're going through. It's always healthy to get a greater understanding if that causes you to become more afraid of what's going on. But to then try our best to keep our heads. Because as this text says, these things will happen. There are things we've faced and lived through. There's things right now that we're living through that have a deep effect on our society and ourselves and our relationships with people around us and our loved ones. And there's going to be more things in the future that we have to deal with. So the question becomes, how do we deal with what's going on now? How do we do it in a constructive way? How can we first make it through what we are going through right now in a healthy and constructive way? And how can we take the lessons both locally, in person, and nationally, and in our communities, and globally, and use those lessons so that if things like this happen later, we know how better to deal with them. And on a personal level, how we can deal with them and how we can be community through this and in the future, how we can better be equipped to be community. Because we're still being called to love God and love our neighbor, to serve each other. For even though these things are happening, we are still called to live out our Christian lives. Now, they call this text Mark's mini apocalypse. And the word apocalypse is not about end, destroy, death. It is about a revealing of things to come. It just usually deals with death and destruction when you look at the literature. And so we got to really ask ourselves, when we look at that word, what is being revealed to us as Christians, as Christian communities? And how best are we going to face this moving forward? Maybe there's going to be smaller events where we can take the lessons that we learned in this global event to help us, equip us for those smaller events. How do we deal with shut-ins and people in our communities that can't be in public, that are locked away from the world for one reason or another? How can we better reach out to them? What lessons can we take from this to reach out to them in a small way in the future, even when we are finally able to get out and do what we want to do that we might not be able to do at this time? We need to be constantly looking at these type of questions. We need to be constantly examining ourselves. And are we being led astray? Are we being led down a rabbit hole that is ultimately more destructive? Are we being led with paranoia and fear, or are we being led with love of God and neighbor? Because we can be socially distanced from each other out of fear, or we can be socially distanced from each other out of love. for each other. Amen.